2005, a mother and daughter were found dead in an apparent home invasion robbery. As the police started tracking down leads, the killer got bold, but as the authorities moved in, they found the motive wasn't exactly what they thought. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Crimelines. This case was a listener suggestion sent in by Nate, and I appreciate him sending this one in and a few others. He actually takes up several lines on my spreadsheet of requested topics. I don't know if people are still listening by the time I get around to covering their suggestions, because it's very often years down the road, but hello, Nate, if you're still here. Let's go ahead and get started with a really interesting woman named Ha Jade Smith. That is her American name that she took on after coming here, but she was born No Tinaka in Vietnam in February of 1953. In May of 1981, when Ha was 28 years old, she had her daughter, her only child, named Anita Vo Ni Hung. After coming to the U.S., she shortened it to just Anita Vo. When Anita was around 4 or 5, Ha took her and fled from Vietnam. I actually didn't know that the mass exodus from Vietnam after the 1975 fall of Saigon continued so long into the 1980s, but it actually went all the way up through the early 90s. Nearly 2 million people left Vietnam due to the post-war conditions and their opposition to the leadership, which was the Communist Party of Vietnam. By the time Ha and Anita left Vietnam, a lot of the chaos of mass emigration was done with, and there was a lot more of a process to do it, rather than just getting on a boat and hoping you make it. Not that it was much easier by land if you didn't have the resources to pay for your way out. Ha had to walk, carrying Anita through Cambodia, and this was hardly a safe journey. Cambodia itself was at war, or technically an armed conflict, and Cambodians were also trying to get to the border to find help seeking safety elsewhere. There were landmines and battles going on, hunger and dehydration, and an issue that Ha faced, disease. She had done her best to cover Anita up to avoid mosquito bites, but she wasn't quite so lucky in avoiding them herself. She ended up getting malaria. But she and Anita made it to the refugee camp in Thailand, spent 2 years there, and then they were eventually offered a resettlement option in the town of Westminster, California, located in Orange County. Westminster accepted a lot of refugees from Vietnam, and even today, decades later, 45% of the residents are either from Vietnam or of Vietnamese ancestry. And I have to say that it must have been comforting to Ha, and especially Anita, who was only 8 years old, to still have so much of their culture and language around them as they settled in. Ha made a name for herself within the community as a fortune teller, and that is actually going to be at the center of this case. So before we proceed, we need to talk first about Orientalism and what Ha actually did. Orientalism is the idea that Western culture is rational and Eastern culture is inferior. In this particular context, it is looking down on Eastern spiritual practices as static and backwards, while ignoring those same features in Western religions. So what did Ha do as a fortune teller? She read palms, she read cards, she did the calendar charts, and all of the things you would expect. There was absolutely mysticism involved. But another thing Ha did, and probably what she was most successful at, was the listening and giving advice side of things. People would tell her the most vulnerable and secret parts of their lives, and she could guide them towards making the right decision. She wasn't trained as a counselor or a therapist, but if you look up the training requirements for a clergy member to act in a similar role or a life coach, you'll see that this is pretty much the same. Unfortunately, Ha's work was treated as different in some of the media reporting. Sometimes even just the reenactment footage would show a dim, spooky room with tarot cards slowly being laid out. The issue isn't necessarily with that imagery, it's that they wouldn't have depicted someone praying for spiritual guidance or divine revelation with their Christian pastor in quite the same way. There is a pretty notable exception to this. The TV show In Ice Cold Blood, hosted by Ice-T, covered this case, and I thought they did a pretty good job presenting what Ha did, not as exotic mysticism, but more like what it really was, which was a business, and it was a business she was good at. We could have a very solid discussion about charging for spiritual guidance and how much was charged, and as those thoughts may creep in, which they certainly did for me in this case, we just have to check in with ourselves and make sure that we are having those same conversations about a fortune teller that we will have about mega church pastors who charge tens of thousands of dollars for marriage retreats or counseling packages. It's not the thought or the conversation or even the judgment that is wrong. It's just that we need to make sure we're pushing our cultural bias to the side so that we can be consistent in the standard we hold people to. And before I exhaust that soapbox any further, let's go ahead and get on with the case. Through her work as a fortune teller, Ha took herself and Anita from having literally nothing but charity as they came here as refugees, and she amassed a fortune. She became so popular in the Vietnamese community in Orange County that word spread, and soon she had clients all over the United States. People would fly to her, and sometimes they would even fly her out to them. They turned to her to have their fortunes read, to seek advice, and to occasionally even have spells cast to increase their luck. But Ha's services did not come cheap. She was considered one of the best, and sometimes she charged people thousands at a time. That money had Ha and Anita living in a nice neighborhood, and it helped pay for Anita's schooling. She initially enrolled in college locally, but as of 2005, she was preparing to attend law school. And being that Ha and Anita were very close, I saw one report that indicated that Ha planned to move with Anita wherever she went to law school. Really, the only thing that seemed to come between the two over the years was Anita's dating, specifically a boyfriend/ex-boyfriend of hers. When Anita was around 18, she started dating a man named Hume, who was a few years older than her. The relationship over the years had some pretty big ups and downs, and there were accusations that Hume cheated, and also accusations that he shoved Anita during arguments. So Ha had reasons not to like him as their relationship progressed, but her dislike seemed to start with one incident in particular. She came home one day when Anita wasn't expecting her, and she found Hume and Anita in bed together. She thought Hume was a distraction to Anita, someone leading her astray, and maybe even someone who was taking advantage of her. So she was probably happy when Anita and Hume called things off in early 2005, even though that didn't mean Hume wasn't hoping they could get back together. He definitely kept showing up to try to win Anita over again. And on Friday, April 22nd, 2005, about 3 months or so after the breakup, Hume came over to the house with coffees and sandwiches for Anita and Ha. He went ahead and left them on the porch, and as he was walking away from the house, he noticed a diamond tennis bracelet on the ground. He assumed it was Ha's, and she had dropped it. Because that was something pretty well known about Ha. In addition to supporting her daughter and putting her through school, she also used her earnings to buy jewelry, which she loved, and she collected the way an art collector would. She was known in the community for it, and if anything, it made people want to consult with her more. It's very much like preachers who work within the prosperity gospel space. If you believe that biblical teachings and adherence to the gospel will make you financially wealthy, or you believe good fortunes will do it, you're going to seek out those who made that happen for themselves first. They clearly know the secret, and Ha certainly made it work for her. So when Hume saw a diamond tennis bracelet on the ground, of course he assumed it was one of Ha's, so he picked it up and he left it with the coffees. That night, around 10 o'clock, Hume went back to the house after he hadn't heard from Anita all day, and he noticed that all the stuff he left there earlier was still on the porch untouched. He then heard Ha's white Pomeranian, Mitty, barking in the backyard, and that was not normal. Hume knew that Ha cared for Mitty like a real baby, and she never would have just put the dog in the yard to bark like that. Hume jumped the fence to see what was going on, and he found that Mitty was actually limping. He tried to look in a window in the back, and he could see that there was some overturned furniture inside the house, so he called 911 and asked for someone to come out to check on Anita and Ha. When the police arrived, they had to break into the house. It was completely locked up, every door and every window. On entering the house, it was pretty apparent that someone had ransacked the place. And this was not one of those staged ransackings we've talked about in other episodes. In this case, every drawer was pulled out and dumped. Couch cushions had been thrown around. Ha's shrines had been knocked over. Someone had really gone through this house. Either they were looking for something specific, or they were really just looking for anything they could take. As the first responders made their way through the house, they found the body of 23-year-old Anita Vo lying face up. She was partway in the laundry room and partway in the hallway. About 10 feet away in the kitchen was the body of her mother, 52-year-old Ha Jade Smith. In the earliest reporting on this case, the police said that the way the bodies were found was unique and it would help identify the killer. But there is no way anyone could have imagined what they meant by that. Both women had been stabbed to death with at least 10 stab wounds each, plus defensive wounds to their hands. Anita was found face up with a shirt over her face and white paint poured over her hands and head. Ha was in a kneeling position, bowing forward with her arms outstretched in front of her. The pose she was in is not a natural pose someone would have fallen into as they were being attacked. Someone put her body in that position. She also had white paint on her head and hands. The investigators noticed that the paint and the blood did not mix together, meaning the blood was dry before the killer dumped the paint on the victims. So either the killer was in the house for a long time, or they left and came back. The white paint was unusual to say the least, so the detectives did a search of the National Crime Database to see if any other murders or assaults involving white paint came up. Was this a signature of a killer, or was it seen in gang-related crimes? But they got nothing. So then they started checking to see if this had cultural significance, either within Ha's Buddhist religion, fortune-telling beliefs, Vietnamese culture, or maybe other Asian cultures. The investigators got some leads here, but they never got an answer that seemed like it was deeply tied to the crime scene. Like they learned that the color white represented mourning in Vietnam, and broadening out to Asia on the whole, they found out that in Chinese theater, painting a face white would indicate that the character is calculating or a villain. But nothing really seemed to make sense for pouring white paint on the head and hands of the dead. There were some other clues at the scene that would eventually help move this case along, much more than the white paint. Even though some of the larger things like televisions were left untouched, it looked like the killer got away with some small but very valuable items: credit cards, cash, and jewelry. The tennis bracelet Hume found was likely dropped by the killer as they left. But Ha was pretty smart in hiding her valuables. She had been burglarized before in 2001, and not long after that, she was then the victim of a home invasion robbery. So after those two incidents, she started hiding her things better, and the police found $64,000 in cash in a vacuum dust bag. And they found a stash of expensive jewelry in the basket of a coffee pot. The killer didn't manage to find those things, but it does explain why they trashed the whole house looking for hidden caches of items. I keep saying killer, but I should say killers because the detectives believed almost from the start that this was at least a two-person job. Neither woman appeared to have tried to make a run for it like you would expect if they were killed one after the other. But there was another reason to believe there were at least two people involved, and that's because two knives were found at the scene. These don't look like items the killers planned to leave behind. They were in a plastic grocery bag and had been partially washed off. It looks like they planned to grab the bag on their way out and simply forgot it. And those knives were taken into evidence and sent to the lab. The police also collected as evidence a towel with a bloody footprint on it. It came from the bathroom, and based on the size, they believed it was a woman's footprint. But they knew it wouldn't be Ha or Anita's. They never made it to the bathroom to leave behind a bloody print like that. It looked like one of the killers had taken a shower to clean up and left this behind. So one of the killers was likely a woman, and they believed the other one may be a man based on a neighbor's statement. This neighbor said she saw a man and a woman leave Ha's home on the morning of Thursday, April 21st, the day before their bodies were found. It was about 11:15 in the morning, and they were driving a dark gray or blue mid-size sedan like a Camry. The neighbor made note of them and what they were driving because they were coming and going from the house using the garage door, which they did not have open all the way. They were ducking under it to come and go. It seemed strange enough that she watched them for a bit and got a pretty good look at both of them. But other than coming and going through the garage, nothing about them seemed off, so she just made a note of it and moved on with her day until she heard later that Ha and Anita had been murdered. The neighbor sat down with the police to make composite sketches of both of these people, and they released them to the media along with the usual line that these people weren't necessarily suspects, but they could have been witnesses who could help piece the timeline together. But the police were definitely thinking they were more than just witnesses. No one recognized them from the sketches, including Anita and Ha's family and friends, but the investigators were sure that the killers were people Ha knew. After the home invasion in 2001, Ha was extremely cautious. She kept her house locked up tight and only opened the door to people she knew. So who did she or Anita know who had a motive to kill either of them? Could it be a disgruntled customer? That seemed possible, especially when a friend told the police that Ha had an appointment with clients who were flying in from Illinois on the day it was believed that the two were killed, Thursday, April 21st. But Ha had a lot of clients. There were over 200 names on her list, and it would take a while to run background checks on them to even begin to narrow down suspects. Another possibility was that this tied back to the previous incident. After the home invasion, Ha identified two men, gang members, as the culprits, but there was not enough evidence to move forward with the charges, and the over $300,000 worth of jewelry and cash they made off with was never recovered. Was it possible they hit her house again and this time decided not to leave a witness behind? The investigators looked for the whereabouts of these men, and it didn't take them long to find them. Both men were locked up on other charges at the time of the murders and could not have been involved. So then the investigators looked into the women's love lives, and specifically into Anita's ex, Hume. There was some potential jealousy there, as it looks like Anita may have started seeing someone else after the breakup, and he knew that Ha didn't support them getting back together. But both Hume and the new love interest were both ruled out as they had alibis. Another early person of interest literally walked up to the police himself. Shortly after the murders, the police were at the house processing more evidence, and while they were there, a man we will call Joe walked up to them. He was a local handyman, and Ha had hired him to do work around the house. He was just wondering what was going on, and the investigators at the scene immediately noticed that he had white paint on his boots and a fresh cut to his hand. It would have been pretty bold of Joe to walk up on them with white paint on him if he was involved, but he did have a spare key to the house, and Ha wouldn't have been alarmed at him coming into the house at all. So they brought Joe in for questioning, and he denied knowing anything about the murders. He said the cut and the paint were just from his line of work. The authorities sent a sample of the white paint from Joe's boots to the lab, and it came back as not a match for the white paint that was poured on the bodies. As these early persons of interest were being looked into and checked off the list one by one, the investigators got some new information. Ha and Anita's stolen credit cards, which had not been canceled, started getting used. The purchases made started out small at first, like the person was testing to make sure they went through and the cards didn't get flagged. And when they worked without issue, the purchases went from small items at a local Target to bigger purchases, like a notebook-style computer and expensive clothing. The authorities got the CCTV footage from Target, and the purchases were made by a woman who had a man with her. And the two people in the footage looked like the sketches made with the neighbor. So they showed these still images from the security footage to Ha's family, but they still had no idea who these people were. Whoever they were stopped using the cards for about a week before someone started using them again, clear across the country in Georgia and then in North Carolina. As the investigators were working to track down who was using the cards, that person made a pretty big purchase. They booked 5 plane tickets to fly from North Carolina to Orange County for Memorial Day weekend. So we're talking the end of May. The flights were for 5 weeks after the murders. One of the tickets was purchased in Ha Smith's name and one in Anita Vo's name. The others had different names on them, but that meant whoever was flying as Ha Smith and whoever was flying as Anita Vo would have to also have their IDs. So the investigators had agents book the seats right behind the fake Ha Smith and watched as a woman and 4 young people, her children, boarded the flight. The woman looked like the person on the Target security camera in Orange County, but she seemed about as far from a killer as you could imagine, particularly with her kids around her. I'm sure part of them was thinking, what killer would outright use the victim's credit cards, knowing the police were investigating these murders? So they thought maybe someone gave the cards to this woman or sold them to her, and all she was really guilty of was using a stolen card. So it was possible she wasn't involved in the murders, but it was very likely she could at least lead the police to who was. So when they got off the plane, they followed the woman. She and her children checked into a hotel. They visited with some family members, and then the woman went shopping using Ha and Anita's credit cards. Having caught her red-handed, when she returned to the hotel on May 30th, 2005, the police moved in and arrested her. They got her name from the hotel registration. She was 41-year-old Tanya Nelson. But that was all the information they were going to get. Tanya refused to even identify herself, and she wouldn't say anything else either, not why she was in the area, and certainly not how she came in possession of Ha and Anita's credit cards. The investigators tried to coax her a little bit, saying maybe this was all a misunderstanding, and she got the cards from someone else, but Tanya refused to talk. She told them she knew her rights and she wanted an attorney. They told her that using the cards was enough for them to arrest her and that they were going to look into her for murder charges, and she still said she just wanted to talk to a lawyer. So they booked Tanya for fraud while they continued to look into her for the double homicide. They first tried to figure out if she even knew Ha and Anita, given that she was living clear across the country in North Carolina. It seemed most likely, given that Tanya was also Vietnamese, that she was a client of Ha's, but the name Tanya Nelson did not appear in the client book. They learned pretty quickly why, though, when they searched Tanya's Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina home and found her planner. In her planner was written her birth name, Phung Thao Tai Nguyen. Like Ha Smith, Tanya took an American name after she immigrated from Vietnam. And when they looked for her real name in the client book, they found it. And they found another really big clue in the planner. The entry, written on April 21st, the day of the murders, actually said the words, "horrible sin." You might wonder who notes in their planner that they committed a horrible sin on the day of a double homicide. And apparently it's the same type of person who uses the victim's credit cards so brazenly and openly. On the search of Tanya's house, they found several items belonging to Ha and Anita, but the biggest clue was a boarding pass. It was for a flight from North Carolina to Orange County on April 19th, 2 days before the murders, but it was not in the name of Tanya Nelson. It was for a man, 50-year-old Philippe Zamora. The investigators pulled his photo from driver records and saw that he looked just like the man who was with Tanya on the Target security footage. He lived near Tanya in North Carolina, so they went out to his house and took him in for questioning. At first, Philippe insisted that he and Tanya had just gone to Orange County to visit people, and nothing really happened while they were there. But he had a lot of trouble keeping his story straight. Remembering a lie is difficult. Eventually, he got so twisted up that he just admitted defeat. He agreed to tell the police everything. It is important to note that Philippe was not consistent with the details in his retellings, so you will see this reflected in coverage of the case. I am going to stick with the order of events that he eventually told at trial, but if you hear it a different way on another podcast or television show, they probably just decided to go with one of his other versions. There is a little backstory before we get into Philippe's version of events that will help everything make a little more sense. Tanya had lived in Orange County after immigrating to the U.S., just like Ha and Anita. She lived there with her husband and 4 children, and she owned what the newspapers called a lingerie and gift shop. Proving to everyone I'm not as smart as I sometimes think I am, I was literally like, what kind of gift shop also sells lingerie? And then it suddenly made sense when I saw it spelled out somewhere else that it was a sex shop. I'm clearly more wholesome than I thought I was. But Tanya's business in California failed, so she moved and restarted it in North Carolina. And according to Philippe, her business was a front for the escort service she ran. He was a customer, but it was a little deeper than that. Philippe was married with children, but he was also gay, so Tanya would set him up with men. This made him her client, but also it made her his secret keeper. And that is what led to their deal to go to Orange County. Tanya told Philippe that if he came along with her to help her with something, she would find men there for him to meet up with. The thing he had to help her with was to rob Ha Smith, the fortune teller. It is not clear from Philippe's various stories how much he knew about Tanya's actual motives ahead of time, but there was always this underlying threat that she would expose him, which made him more likely to do what she wanted. The flight they took had a layover in Chicago, which was in line with Ha's friends saying that Ha was meeting with people coming in from Illinois. On the morning of April 21st, Philippe and Tanya went out to breakfast with Ha before going back to her house so that Tanya's fortune could be read. Philippe sat in another room and waited. According to Philippe, after Tanya and Ha came out from the room, they went into the kitchen. Ha's daughter Anita was in there, and Tanya grabbed a knife and started stabbing Anita. Of course, Ha began to scream, watching her only child be brutally attacked, and Tanya yelled at Philippe to kill her. Don't let her scream. Philippe said he panicked and he wanted Ha to stop screaming, so he picked up a wine bottle and he hit her with it, striking her in the shoulder. Then he physically wrestled Ha to the ground and began stabbing her with another knife. He said it just all happened so fast. After killing the women, Philippe washed up in the kitchen, including washing the knives, while Tanya took a shower. They then ransacked the house, finding whatever they could. They didn't take anything big as far as size went, but any small valuables they found, like purses, jewelry, and credit cards, they grabbed. At some point, Tanya said they needed to go get paint, so they drove to Walmart to buy a gallon of white paint. Tanya told Philippe they needed to pour it on the heads and hands of Ha and Anita. Anita, who was face up, still had her eyes open, and Philippe could not stand to look at her, so he covered her face with a shirt before pouring on the paint. Philippe did not know why Tanya said to pour paint on the bodies. He didn't know if it was a ritual, though it was nothing he was familiar with. The authorities eventually concluded that Tanya likely did this to obscure forensic evidence, but they don't know for sure because Tanya has refused to say. Philippe and Tanya then flew back to North Carolina the next day on April 22nd, the same day the bodies were found. On the flight home, Tanya told Philippe that Ha had been marked for death because of a fortune she gave Tanya that Tanya said had not come true. She said Ha was a liar, and so was Anita, who had cheated her just like Ha had. This motive change, first telling Philippe they were going to rob them, and then telling him it had to do with a fortune, was interesting because of something else the police found in Tanya's house. They had found a letter from Ha to Tanya refusing to change a fortune she had made. It would come out that as Tanya was having financial and marital issues in California, Ha told her that her business would prosper in North Carolina, except it didn't. Things were worse than ever. But there was another reason Tanya moved to North Carolina, and it had nothing to do with business. It had to do with the issue Ha refused to help Tanya with. Tanya had cheated on her husband with his brother Loy, and Tanya was obsessed with Loy. When he moved to North Carolina, in part to get away from her, Tanya packed up her kids, but not her husband, and moved to North Carolina as well. Loy had fully moved on and wanted to be left alone, but Tanya would not let that happen. He was in a relationship with someone else, and when Tanya found out, she tried to get her son to kidnap the other woman. Twice, she broke into Loy's house, and one of those times she stole a picture, which was then later found in her home. Another time, she confronted Loy, and when he refused to discuss getting back together, she allegedly pulled a gun on him. Instead of shooting, she pistol whipped him. Tanya clearly wanted Loy back, but the way she was going about it certainly wasn't working. So she asked Ha to cast a spell that would bring Loy back to her, but Ha refused. Remember how I said earlier that Ha was working in a role like a counselor or a life coach or an advisor? That is what she was doing here. Ha knew that Tanya needed to get over Loy, let that man be at peace, and move on with her own life. She needed to stop trying to chase this extremely toxic and escalating situation. Ha would not do something or say something she didn't think was right, no matter how loyal or well-paying the client was. So she told Tanya no, and that Tanya needed to accept this situation, which was not what Tanya paid to hear. It seems that it was both the refusal to do what Tanya wanted and the failed fortune of a successful business that angered Tanya enough that she wanted Ha and Anita dead, and she took their things as a repayment for what she perceived she lost. With Philippe's confession, the charges against Tanya Nelson were upgraded to 2 counts of murder, grand theft, burglary, and using another's identity for gain. Philippe ended up making a deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, they would give him a chance at parole one day, but he had to testify against Tanya. In April of 2009, 4 years after the murders, he entered his plea. His sentencing, however, was delayed until after the resolution of Tanya's case, since it was contingent on him helping the state out. If they sentenced him first, they'd have no recourse if he backed out and refused to testify. Tanya went to trial not quite a year later in early 2010, and her defense was that Philippe Zamora did it alone, and Tanya wasn't even there when the murders took place. He threw her under the bus to make a deal for himself. I wondered how Philippe would have even known Ha Smith if not for Tanya, but then I found an old press release from the Orange County District Attorney that said Philippe's wife was actually also a client of Ha's. The defense was smart in that they focused on the most severe charges that they could find room for reasonable doubt, the murders, and they didn't really defend the theft so much since Tanya had been caught red-handed. And the defense said that when it came to those murders, the state mostly just had Philippe's story, which had changed repeatedly. The defense pointed out that no DNA was found at the scene that matched Tanya, even though Philippe's DNA was on the handles of 2 of the kitchen knives used in the stabbing. As for the bloody footprint on the towel, the state said it was consistent with Tanya's foot, but it's not like there was a lot of definition there, or that there was anything particularly unique about this print or about Tanya's foot. It was consistent with her foot, but calling it a match was a stretch. The defense really did what they could to poke holes in the state's circumstantial case, but in the end, the jury didn't buy it. They believed Philippe, and Tanya was found guilty on all charges, including 2 felony counts of special circumstances murder, which meant in California she was eligible for the death penalty. The special circumstances, aka aggravating factors, were that this involved multiple victims, the murders happened during the commission of a robbery, and it was murder by lying in wait. The lying in wait part applied to Anita's murder. She wasn't initially home that morning. She was out having coffee when she got a phone call, and the people she was with said that after she hung up, she said she had to head home. Lying in wait, legally speaking, doesn't mean they just hid in bushes and jumped out to kill her. It means that 1, they concealed their purpose, 2, they waited for a chance to strike, and then 3, made a surprise attack on the victim. If Anita was lured home because of some ruse when the plan was actually to kill her, and then they waited for the opportunity to strike, and then Tanya started stabbing her unexpectedly, those things check off the elements of lying in wait. The defense argued against the death penalty, saying that Tanya still had value in this world, particularly to her children, and they also questioned the difference in what the state wanted as far as sentences went. Philippe was facing a maximum of 50 years to life when he committed the same crime as Tanya. So how could they justify sentencing Tanya to death? Tanya herself didn't hear most of the arguments for and against the death penalty because she did not attend all of her sentencing hearing. She had at some point screamed at the jury saying she was innocent and was removed from the courtroom, and after that, she decided not to attend. The jury decided to recommend that Tanya be given a death sentence, but it would ultimately be up to the judge. And prior to this final sentencing, Tanya sent the judge a letter saying she was innocent. According to OC Weekly, she wrote that she had flown to Orange County in April of 2005 in order to check up on her husband, who she believed was having an affair. That's actually what she was doing on the day Ha and Anita were murdered. She was out spying on her husband. She said the credit cards she used were not stolen from the house that day. She claimed that House Smith had actually been one of her customers for her store and ordered by phone, so she had the credit cards already. The judge was not swayed by the contents of this letter and accepted the recommendation of the jury. Tanya Nelson was sent to death row. She is, as of this recording in February of 2026, still appealing. As for Philippe Zamora, he was sentenced to 25 years to life, and he was first eligible for parole in 2025 after 20 years behind bars, but parole was denied for 3 years. His next eligibility is in 2028 when he will be 74 years old. It is time for Patreon birthday shoutouts for February, and I want to say a very happy birthday to Camilla, Jen, Jenny, Alex, and Emily. I'm wishing you a year filled with joy and success and all the things that make you smile. You have been such an important part of me growing Crimelines as Patreon supporters, and I am so grateful for it. So from me to you, I want to say happy birthday.